Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's discussion, The Path to a Digital-First Mindset in Insurance, sponsored by Aptitude Software. I'm Laura Roy with Carrier Management, and we're happy you're here. Now, let me tell you a little bit about today's presenter, David Fourie, Financial Transformation Partner with KPMG. David collaborates with executives to transform their finance organization and to be ready for the future. With more than 22 years of experience in the KPMG advisory and audit practice, he understands both the financial reporting and business aspects of a finance organization. Becoming a digital-first finance organization is not only an option anymore, so David helps his clients accomplish this change in a pragmatic way with tangible results through the transformation journey. So now just a quick rundown of what David is going to cover today. First, the challenges to the insurance industry faces. Also, why now? Why is now the time to innovate? He's going to talk about digital finance mindset and the paths to get there. And then we'll wrap it up with a Q&A at the end. So remember to put your questions in the questions tab on the side of your panel. So David, before I pass this off to you, let's take a quick poll and hear from our audience. Okay, here we go. What do you see as the most important driver for digitalization? So I'll leave this up for a few seconds here to give everybody a chance to answer. Is it to address regulatory and accounting changes, to increase automation and operational efficiency, to optimize resources and reduce cost, or to better leverage data and analytics for business insight? So it looks like here, David, that's interesting. It looks like to increase automation and operational efficiency is definitely important, and then to better leverage the business insights. So what's your take on that? And then I'll let you move forward with the presentation.
Thank you, Laura, and good morning, good afternoon to all the participants that's joined us. Truly appreciate you taking time out to connect and have a conversation about where things are going and how we progress and move to a more digital finance organization. I have to say, Laura, I'm not really surprised about those responses that we had. It's what we normally see, and absolutely, as we think about how we've gone on this journey with our clients, it absolutely is focused on that automation aspect and the opportunity around it. But the reality is that the driver behind the automation and operational efficiency is the fact that we're really looking for folks to be able to leverage data and analytics better within the finance organization and drive that business insight and really move to more of a business partnering model. So those two answers goes very nicely together for me, and really not surprised at all. So if we think about the conversation today, and where things are, the industry challenges that exist, is really there to help drive and sort of provide innovation and insight. And so why is it that we're seeing folks go through this now? When we look at it, there's a need for agility and growth, and the ability to scale. And that doesn't apply just to the larger organizations. We're equally seeing it in smaller organizations and even in startups, where you want to be able to grow, add new products, new solutions, new systems, or even add synergies, integration and acquisitions of other entities. And so all of that in a more dynamic world becomes really important for us as we look towards what finance needs to be capable of. Within that remit, it's good to grow, but what we've seen in the past is that as an organization grows, finance grows equally, and at some point you get to a place where it feels disproportionate. And it's largely because of the manual intervention that exists within the finance processes for a lot of organizations. And that means that the cost of finance becomes a sticky point for a number of organizations. And so we are looking at how do we lower that overall cost of ownership for finance. And we look at that in a couple of different ways, which I'll discuss with you today. Looking at sort of the last one around transformation enabler, there it truly is focused on that business partnering aspect. Business needs to be able to make faster decisions, decisions that needs to be anchored in the finance information and the financial statements and results. And so how do we make sure that there's integration connectivity between it, and that folks that makes decisions are able to actually rely on what they have and can help drive operational organizational efficiency and profitability. And then looking a little bit more to the future, ESG is a hot topic, not just in Europe, where there's a lot of stuff already going on, but also as we look at some of the SEC guidance and expected changes we have in the US, we expect to see more guidance coming out and it becoming a higher topic for us. And the general perspective is that certain aspects around ESG reporting would actually fall into finance, because that's where we have that controlled environment, and where there's a degree of trust in finance organizations to make sure that there's reliable and trustable information coming out of the ESG framework and processes. And then obviously, we have numerous stakeholders, both from a regulator, shareholder, and otherwise. And so really being able to give them more dynamic and frequent access to information is a critical part of why we see organizations focusing on that. And then lastly, the item that's not on this board, but what we do see is that the evolution for insurance finance organizations to cloud-first, cloud-native technologies. The most finance organizations in the insurance space have now been on their legacy on-premise ERPs for an extended period of time, ranging from probably a decade to some folks that I've chatted to have even gone upwards of 30 years on their ERPs. And so there is a tipping point where you really do want to move off, get new functionality, get new features, get modern technology in place. Finance and financial services in general lags behind other industry players. And so we know that there is a point to catch up, and we do see more of that catch up actually starting to happen. And we expect that as more organizations replace and modernize their architecture, they will get a competitive advantage if they do it appropriately. And that's typically where we focus with our clients, is around that digitalization and improvement pieces. So what does that mean when we look at this more closely? The whole concept of a digital finance mindset, can we get into more specifics around the component pieces that's behind it? So when we look at that, there's essentially 8 aspects to that we are looking at and that we typically consider when we think about a digital mindset. And most of these things that we're describing are aspects that we're actually seeing taking place. Some of it is a little bit more feasible on the property and casualty side, like the real-time data, which I'll talk about. But in general, I would say most of these things are equally applicable across the landscape, and really is reflective of where we see CFOs teams focus, as well as what the enabling technologies like Aptitude delivers for us, as we go through this data and finance transformation journey. So when we think about access to real-time data, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing real-time financial close. I'll talk about sort of dynamic close, which is really the way we look at it next. But it is about having accessibility to data at a much higher frequency than what we'd normally have, where it's fully reconciled and controlled against the financial information. And so I do have a client where we've worked with them where we've put real-time APIs between the front-end admin systems. And so they are continuously getting real-time information into their finance architecture that enables them to transform how they're looking at things and the frequency that they are looking at information, and potentially making decisions, shifting away from that model where everything's done at the back end of the month. Tied to that is the concept of a dynamic close. So what you'll see is that we're not talking about a real-time close. We're not talking about some of the traditional terms about a continuous close, because when we look at this, because of automation that happens, you're more in a dynamic world of closing the books, and it isn't really closing the books, because there's certain activities that we all know will only happen at the end of the month. But that dynamic nature of understanding what's going on in the business, how do I describe it, where am I seeing things that's anomalous to what I expect, that I can make more proactive and more timely decisions, and I'm not waiting until the financial statements have been closed, which in some instances might be 45 days after month end. It's bringing that forward, and really there's a significant competitive advantage that you start gaining when you're seeing information with a higher frequency. You can start making decisions during the course of a month versus having to wait until you've actually closed the book. So dynamic close becomes really important. Scalability and agility, I'll talk about together for you on this. It's about the capacity to scale and add more production activities and volumes. And so scalability for me is both from a data, product, solution perspective, as well as, if you do an acquisition, how do you add that? But scaling without necessarily adding material or additional headcount, thereby enabling us to be in a place where the cost of finance stays at an acceptable level versus a disproportionate growth. And then agility is that ability to make decisions fairly quickly, bring new products on more quickly. Think about what happens when we get to a world where there's potential more dynamic pricing models behind certain products or solutions that we offer to our clients, as well as in that integration of an acquisition where you're less focused around how do I line up two different ERPs, or how do I bring multiple chart of accounts together to have a consolidated view, really having that ability to integrate better. And as I talk about the integrated architecture, I'll explain that for you a little bit more. And then if we think about sort of the aspects about bringing automation in place and bringing greater control to finance users, putting the right technology in place as you modernize your architecture, it does provide the ability to have more dynamic dashboards and reporting. And so you're really running finance more from an analytics perspective, enabled by the automation of the processes or the manual calculations that we've done through technology like Aptitude. And that gives you that ability to have better control, more reconciliations, are automated, what you're looking at can be trusted in decision making, which puts more powers at your hands as you work through that. And that obviously enables you to then take your historical data, bring it into your enterprise performance management planning solutions, where you can look more dynamically at the actuals versus plan and doing forecasting. That gives you that forward-looking insight that helps drive more value for the organization, not just greater efficiency in the finance organization. And all of that together with the degree of automation that you can accomplish obviously puts you in a position where you can do more in finance with less total cost of finance, and enable you to have sort of a growth and consistency of it, which I know for a lot of organizations is probably a fairly topical item as we go into some potentially challenging economic times. So when we think through how do we bring all of this together, we do have what we refer to as an integrated architecture inside KPMG. And within this integrated architecture, we're looking at sort of the core component pieces that's needed for finance to really deliver against the high automation that we have seen companies accomplish when they modernize their finance technology. And so let me talk through this a little bit in more detail as we go through the concepts and the component pieces, and I'll highlight for you what's different from what we have seen in the past and how organizations are using it. This diagram that you see that's fairly busy, it is based on what we have found. I would say unequivocally every single finance organization, banking, financial services, but also and very much so in the insurance space, these component pieces, everybody's bringing together in the new architecture. And so the age-old architecture that just have a cloud ERP or a core ERP at the center, that has gone away. And it is really these optimal pieces that gives you the digital first capability. So starting on the left-hand side, we obviously have all of our administrative systems. It could range from a policy admin system, a single billing and collection system. Maybe we have a single agency, commission type solution, and potentially, obviously, the claim systems. All of them feeding into the finance architecture and being needed. To a number of us, probably have several of those. There's not too many of us that have the luxury of having a single underwriting platform. And so what we typically see is that the data from those front-end systems is brought into a data layer before it comes into the finance architecture, which is the blue and green elements that you see on the screen. Or in instances where it is a smaller number of systems, that's where you definitely can look at real-time APIs to move the data across. And that's also where we see folks transform their controls and their processes. And for one of the clients that we've worked with, we've added digital signatures as we're moving data so that we're certifying data as we go through the process. We're doing less of the traditional reconciliations so that we have more preventative controls versus detective controls within the architecture. The one that I would say is new to the architecture, but not new to the industry and have been around now for a long time, is that first bubble referenced as the Finance Hub. This is where Aptitude plays the role, that this is what their technology supports. And this is really the heart of finance as we look at it in the future. Why do we say that? The technology enables multiple bases of accounting to be in a single place. It gives us the ability to have a variety of finance and accounting rules set up to it, multiple rule sets as to how it would potentially post to the general ledger, and if for some reason if it's got to go to more than one GL, it's feasible to do it. Although we typically find that it's an optimized path to a single ledger when you bring the Finance Hub into the mix. And then a variety of other calculations and rules that you would look at, such as allocation rules for P&C companies, doing deferred acquisition cost calculations, doing the UPR calculations, potentially looking at it from a statutory perspective and actually doing the calculations and derivation to get your non-admitted receivable component of your past due premiums, and a variety of other things that happens within it that all get set up. And the technology enables us to substantially, if not fully, automate most of the things that we do today potentially in Excel. And so it really becomes the heart of it. Now, what really changes the dynamic for us when we start using the Accounting Hub is that right-hand quadrant, where we reference event-based subledger. So what does that mean? What we have found is that we are bringing very granular level of detail into the Finance Hub. And so we typically refer to that as event data, not transactional data. And as an example, that would mean that you could see the original policy being issued. You can see all of the endorsements associated with it, and you understand how a policy evolves. But you're also connecting policy, billing and collection, claims, and other data through common keys within it, so that when you're at an event level and you have this low level of granularity, you can see the financial performance potentially even at a customer level or at an individual policy level. So really look at customer or policyholder profitabilities, but it's all at such a low level that you're automatically reconciling to what's in the GL, and thereby we're automating a very high number of more traditional manual reconciliations that would have existed by moving to that transparent model. The event-based or the business events that we're getting from the front-end systems, that's connected to all of your accounting calculations, rules, accounting entries, and so you have business event and accounting events connected in that event-based subledger. And as you can see, the two arrows going up, that enables you to change how you do your financial reporting pieces, and how you start using dynamic dashboards like with Power BI, where you can start looking at things and you're drilling through to the appropriate level of detail without having to add supplemental data after the GL and dealing with a whole bunch of fun reconciliations. And so within the accounting hub, what we typically then see is that we would aggregate on a daily basis or higher frequency the accounting entries that then can go to a simplified general ledger in your cloud ERP. And then the typical traditional modules that we see within the cloud ERP would typically stay. Most insurance organizations don't have the account receivable module, largely because they use an insurance billing and collection application. But to the extent that you use it, traditional ERP pieces still stays intact within that. The critical piece there is that as you move to a cloud-based GL, if you have an accounting hub, you're obviously able to simplify what you have in the GL. And we typically advise our clients in any case that you need to think about a simplified ledger in the future. You can't have a thick ledger like you've had in the traditional on-prem ledgers. You're naturally going to be forced into a simplified ledger construct, which is why the combination of an accounting hub and the cloud ERP or GL becomes so powerful. The ERP, as well as then the accounting hub, gives you that controlled environment that can feed into the reporting solutions. And so typically for finance, that financial reporting software would be something like a Workiva or Narrative Reporter, from a financial statement preparation perspective, be that GAAP or be that STAT. Potential other static management reporting within those as well as obviously your statutory software, be that a gain compliance that's new kid in the block, or some of the legacy ones like Bound. That's sort of the green box, and all of those pieces feed into great automation on the reporting side. And then the top box that talks about management reporting allows you to have those dynamic dashboards that gives you life cycle information and helps you understand how your business evolves over time. Moving to the bottom first, reconciliation software that still has relevance and applicability. It changes a little bit in what you might have done there before. If we think about balance sheet income statement reconciliations, where data is flowing through the finance hub, but things like transaction matching for accounts receivable, for instance, that still remains highly relevant when we think about some of the features in the reconciliation software, as well as some of the other value and benefits that they bring from a close and reconciliation control perspective. And so that remains a critical piece we still look at. Variety of tax applications. We don't want to forget about the tax folks, but again, there's pieces in there where we think about some of the tax stuff to be just another basis of accounting. So when we talk about multi-GAAP, how do you set up certain tax basis rules? in that potentially makes your tax applications a little bit simpler, recognizing that for most of us, we got to deal with not just the federal filings, but we also got to deal with the state filings from a premium tax perspective and the likes. And then last but not least, in the top quadrant, we refer to the cloud EPMs. That's really where we're bringing the historical data together with the budget plan, multi-year forecasts, where you can start looking at actuals to plan to forecast. Really gives you the ability to look at things more dynamically. If you think about that in context of what we've talked about around changing the frequency of information. And you'll see we have a top quadrant there where we refer to driver-based models, where bringing in driver-based models supports greater efficiencies in scenario what-if analysis, but also enhancements in forecasting. And so as we put these different integrated pieces together, obviously enables us to actually start shifting to a highly digital, highly modernized architecture. And each of these component pieces actually have unique technologies that are fit for purpose. And so you do wind up with a combination of applications that fits within that spectrum to enable it. But if put together in the right way, it gives you great efficiency and abilities to truly modernize not just the technology, but how you actually operate what you do and the insights that you can gain within the finance organization. So with that, let me take a bit of a breather here. We're going to do one more polling question, so I'm going to go back to Laura. And I'll take a sip of water at the same time while we'll go through the polling question. So Laura, back to you.
Sounds good, David. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so let's launch this question for our audience. Where are you with your digital financial transformation journey? I'll leave this up for a second. Are you just researching and learning? Is it being considered in your organization, but it's not yet set in motion? Is the project approved, but it hasn't been started? Have you already started, or your transformation project is complete? And then there you go, David.
Leave it up for me for a second, Laura. Let me just quickly look at this. And not surprising necessarily about the responses. So as folks can see, we've got a good, nearly just shy of 80% of folks that's learning, sort of thinking about how do we get things in motion, folks that started, and then folks that's got project approved but haven't really started yet. So I think it's perfect timing for you to sort of participate in this conversation, and hopefully I can provide you some additional perspective as you go on that journey. So let's talk a little bit about it, because I'm sure folks that's joined us are thinking that all sounds great, that sounds like nirvana. How on earth is it possible to actually achieve this? Seems like a lot of work, and in some cases might even be, this is a lot more than we anticipated. So when we look at this from a KPMG perspective, we've evolved how we support our clients. And so most of what I will cover in the next couple of minutes will be talking you through some of the different paths that we have put in place to support clients, making sure that we can cater, I want to say, to all needs. And the first one that I'll talk about, sort of around subscription-based solution, is really focused on how do we actually enable mid-sized finance organizations to accomplish some of the stuff that larger organizations are trying to go through, but recognizing obviously that there's less funding available for big transformations. And so we really look at three paths. One is net new, which we refer to sort of as a subscription-based solution. And I will go through each of these in more detail for you. The second path is what we look at as pre-configured solutions with flexibility in deployment options. And really what's centered around there is the investments that KPMG have made around what we call our powered finance solution, which is built of leading practice. And so how do we bring that together for folks to help drive this? And then lastly, path 3 is an alternative path, which we look at as an extending the life of existing finance architecture. So by no means are we saying, hey, you got to replace everything. There might be component pieces where when you look at it, like on the EPM side, you might be on a adaptive or an Anaplan or a Tagetic or a board or one of the EPM solutions that's out there. We wouldn't say go replace it, maybe keep it. But how do you do different things? And depending on budgets, maybe you don't have to do anything with your general ledger yet. You can leave your core ERP in place, and you really focus more on doing something like an accounting hub that helps you transform your processes around it so that you can drive value and de-risk sort of how you would replace the GL in the future or your core ERP. And so that extending the life of the existing architecture is definitely a path that exists, and one that several of our clients are on. So let me finish my train of thought just around path 3, because I do want to talk and spend more time around path 1 and 2. So we are working with several clients there. Like I said, we're deploying accounting hub technology for those ones. It is very intentional about how we look at that. And those projects are typically focused on the following 2 categories of activities. One is to look at your existing GL ERP and see what customizations have you made, what custom rule sets have you done, like for instance, potentially complex allocations, and how do we move some of those things out of the GL or the ERP into the accounting hub where it's intended to be a rules engine. And so that's one category of things that folks are looking at under path 3. The other one that's tied to it is to say, okay, what are we doing manually? Where are we using Excel spreadsheets? And how do we bring those rule sets into the accounting hub, automate those rule sets, simplify sort of the architecture, have a single point of integration, make sure we have the right accounting rules all set up that we can receive the data, do consistent processing, and harmonize what we've got. And so when we do think about sort of that extended path, very intentional decisions that's being made that transforms what happens where, but also puts you on a path with a modern process and potentially modern controls without having to immediately affect what you have from a core ERP perspective. So that's sort of the path 3 around that. So let's jump into the first 2 categories. And you can think about these pieces as all being well connected in how they work. And so the subscription-based model uses a lot of the stuff that we've invested in, built out around the Preconfigured solution as an accelerator. But the big difference is that we recognize and acknowledge in KPMG the challenges that clients have around getting insurance, accounting, and systems up and running for either startups or smaller organizations where there's a dependency on IT resources and new knowledge, and it's not that easy to adopt a new technology in Aptitude that requires new training, or you need to move to a cloud ERP, and again need to train new people, and it becomes a little bit of a challenge to adopt new technology for medium to small organizations. And we also look at it from the perspective of, if you do this the right way, you've got the ability to continuously evolve your organization's capabilities because it's cloud-based. And so the subscription-based solution that we've developed on the KPMG side is a combination at the core of Aptitude and Microsoft Dynamics D365. So don't confuse that with some of the smaller scale products that Microsoft have. D365 we do view as more of their, I'll call it, highly scalable, big entity ERP. And what we've done is partnered with them to have a insurance pre-configured solution that's available for our clients more as a subscription model. And so we're in that subscription model, we're removing several steps within the traditional finance transformation process. We don't talk about needing to pick new technology. We really have sort of pre-set it up. And the deployment timeline for that pre-configured solution obviously is a lot smaller because we've already set it up to handle all of the core functionality, the calculation rules, and a variety of other processes that's needed for finance. And you can think about that subscription model as a single payment that's being made that provides you access to the technology that you need, the ability to access the functionality, as well as what we do within that model is provide our clients an ongoing managed service behind it. And so really, we're taking the burden of maintaining the target operating model, the technology, the processes out of your hands. That becomes our responsibility, and your team can focus on running the business and making decisions using the content that's coming out of that pre-configured solution stack. Why does that make sense? We're using the same functionality and features that we use for clients around Path 2. It is an end-to-end solution. It gives us the ability to do an accelerated implementation. And it is something that we typically find are more attractive for smaller organizations with smaller budgets, because you are really entering into a more long-term relationship and support model where you can access it. And then also we're continuously evolving and enhancing the features that's coming out of it. So you're accessing greater analytic capabilities and insights as we continue to improve the product base around that subscription model. So that's sort of the first alternative that's out there. And as I mentioned, really something net new that we've brought to market more recently. If we think about Path 2, so in that Path 2, you can think about it to some degree as a traditional implementation. However, the traditional implementation is slightly different in that we're not just focused on helping you work through what is the requirements, what does it look like, what do you need to do, and then go custom build for you, what you have. That is still a valid path. We do support clients with that, but really our model and preferred model is to walk in and say, okay, we have a pre-configured solution. It is customizable. We calibrate it against what you need. It is, you've directly licensed the technology. You can pick your own ERP and choose what you want there, and it could be Aptitude with an Oracle or a Workday or a Microsoft, or equally could be sort of a single stack solution if that's the preferred path. But walking in with that pre-configuration leading practice that we bring from a powered perspective gives you access to an operating model, processes, and then enables you to deploy that solution more custom fit for your purpose. And so the diagram that you see on the screen, it talks a little bit about what does it look like, how does it work, the typical phases we have around doing that from a planning, architecture, configuration, deployment perspective, and optimization. It is an agile delivery model where you can release features over time, and that could be going live with systems or component pieces like premiums, and growing into this over time. And so we really don't see traditional waterfall big bang projects anymore. We deliver value throughout. And as we go through that, customization of what you need and building it out, transition either to you internally to pick it up, or similarly, to what we've talked about before. We provide our clients what we now call evolution services, which is the ability to manage and maintain the operating model that sits around your chosen technology, that provides you the ability to not have to worry about the upgrades and the maintenance and support. That all comes part and parcel of what you have access to, while you then also can focus again on the type of services, the type of decisions that you need to make. Relative to the way we have done it in the past, there is increased efficiencies in the cost of implementing it. There is a reduction in time potentially of how long it gets to deploy the process, and similarly we would focus on what manual processes we need to remove for you, but clearly there's a lot of more decisions that you as an organization would make under this pre-configured solution model, where you've got customization coming into play. And then again, there's the decision that you would need to think through about what is the right timing for you to obtain the data or run the processes, and enable you to make decisions at the right point in time with the right information that's available. And then one last thought about sort of the solution. Although we've got the accounting hub pieces all set up and we've got accelerators around the ERPs and recommended chart of accounts, equally when we think about this, we look at your management reporting pieces, because that becomes a critical input into the architecture to make sure that when you are through this modernization path, you've enabled your finance teams and executives to have insight and intelligence at their fingertips. They know what's going on in the business, and it ideally enables them to make better and more effective decisions because they can see the information and access information at a greater frequency. So with that, I know I ran through a lot of things fairly quickly around the models. In summary behind it, I mean, both these technologies both these paths uses leading practice, as to what we've seen in the industry. We continuously keep that updated and up to date, and learn from all of our clients as we go through it. And we continue to enhance the functions and features that we have within the technologies that's been deployed. It's just the question of, do you want to own the technology stack yourself for the long duration, or do you want to access a simplified subscription-based model where there's greater technology flexibility, but you're continuously enhancing what you've got? So some decisions, and I'm more than happy to meet with clients and sort of talk through and help you think through what makes sense for you as an organization. So with that, let me close out my remarks, and I'll see if we had any questions come through from our participants, or if there's any questions that we received beforehand that we want to talk through. So as I look through things, let me see some of the questions we've got. So one of the questions we received was around, can you provide some insight on how to use finance automation to fund growth in my organization? Really interesting question, a little bit more challenging question as well. So if you think about what we can do, then the automation naturally means that we have a lower cost within what we do within finance. And so that lower cost of the finance organization and the ability to do more with less enables us to look at how do we deploy our available funds to do more. And so from a growth perspective, we really look at it as the ability to reinvest in what we have from a product perspective, and really thinking about what makes sense and the speed that we can bring new products to market that can help fund and drive growth. But equally, if we think about the analytics that can sit around this now, you will wind up in a place where you have insight potentially around, let's say, a marketing campaign that you've got. How is it performing? And let's assume it's a global campaign. Are there certain areas where the campaign is resulting, giving you a better result than expected, and others it's not quite as expected? And so you can adapt more quickly and sort of double down in areas where you're seeing the growth because of a marketing campaign, and areas where you're really not seeing the return that you expected on the campaign, you can scale back, which are things that we wouldn't necessarily have been able to do as easily. And so that ability and accessibility to really higher frequency insight and analytics can help drive making more profitable decisions that I believe would be helpful. Hopefully that gave you some perspective on the first question.
Okay, so we've got the second question here. Are there parts of our legacy finance systems that can still exist post-digital transformation? And how can these legacy systems coexist with cloud-based technologies?
Great question. So the answer is yes. There are definitely legacy finance systems that potentially could coexist. And the example I gave you is probably the most obvious one for now, which would be your core ERP could remain intact. It depends on what challenges might exist around it. So if it's working well and you don't have issues, so let's just use an example maybe, and I'll stick to sort of my Microsoft examples. So let's say you're on Great Plains. Nothing really wrong with Great Plains, but you've got batch feeds into the Great Plains, and so you're really not getting the transparency that you need. And if somebody's asking a question, you got to go to Excel spreadsheets or otherwise extract new data to go do an analysis, and it takes you a couple of days to work through, well, what happened. So in that scenario, though, Great Plains could remain. If you add aptitude in front of a Great Plains, where we now start bringing in event-based detail, we're repointing the feeds from directly into Great Plains in batch format to have the event-based information available feeding into Great Plains. You can still continue to use Great Plains that way you've had it before, the way it feeds to your statutory reporting software. All of those good things can remain, but you can really enhance and enrich the timing, frequency, and transparency of information you get by virtue of what we do in aptitude. And so that would remain intact. Similarly, there are some technologies which to some degree I'd call legacy, but they're sort of part and parcel of our world, and they will never go anywhere, which would be our statutory filing software, the Blue Book, Yellow Book, White Book, Green Books. All of that stat in AAC filing software will remain. They'll get modernized over time, but they would definitely stay. And then similarly, the EPN pieces, depending on how you're doing planning and forecasting, that could potentially stay based on what you've got. One last thought around that one as well is you don't have to do all of these things simultaneously. And so we typically approach this from a perspective of saying, let's deal with the data first. Let's get the granularity right. Let's get the access to the data when we need it. Get all of that stood up, and then we can start dealing with enhancements to other processes. And so, for instance, if your planning and forecasting is in Excel spreadsheets today, okay, that's not the greatest necessarily. There's better technology out there, but again, you don't have to immediately go replace that. We typically want to make sure we put the right foundation in place before we move forward. And then lastly, how can this legacy systems coexist in the cloud? You're obviously dealing with on-prem versus cloud technologies, and without jumping into the weeds, there's numerous technologies and enabling pieces that exist today that can help us get through integration between on-prem and cloud-based SaaS solutions that runs in the cloud, and so that typically is not a problem to be able to integrate between on-prem in cloud or even cloud to cloud if you've got a hybrid cloud solution.
Okay, good. Thank you. That was great. This one, we've got, can you provide some of the benefits of migrating our GL to the cloud?
Sure. So that's a tricky one for me, largely because if you only look at it from a pure ERP perspective and you don't add an accounting hub to the mix, we still struggle with articulating what is the cost benefit and is there really a return on investment in doing that, because that isn't cheap. There's still cost involved in it. However, there are clear benefits when you go to a cloud ERP in that your maintenance and support models changes. There's greater ability. Some of these technologies are automatically maintained for you to some degree as you go through it. And so your life cycle of managing and staying current on versions becomes better. And then obviously what the ERP vendors have done is they've invested in the user interface and certain features and functionality. The core GL is the core GL, so I wouldn't say that there's an improvement in user interface and everything else, but it's not like the core functionality have radically changed about what you do in the GL. Whereas some of the other features around accounts payable and the likes obviously has improved from a workflow processing perspective. And so it does give you a more user-friendly, more efficient way of doing stuff if you just do the cloud ERP. But if you're truly looking at it more from I want to get to a higher degree of automation, potentially reduce my cost of finance for my organization, I would encourage you to truly think about an accounting hub and the GL ledger ERP replacement together, because that's where you truly can get positive ROIs, or at least a good ROI over a shorter duration on the investment that you will have to make.
Okay, good. That makes sense. So we've got two more questions. First, what do you see as some of the critical gaps of a legacy non-cloud finance system architecture that need to be filled as part of the transformation initiative?
Sure. So the main one that comes to mind for me is the fact that in most cases, the way we've set up the legacy ERPs and especially the GLs has been through batch processing, as well as the fact that to enable that batch processing, we took all of our accounting rules, like for instance UPR, and it's either in a black box ETL or we built it in Excel spreadsheets or highly customized our admin systems to handle the accounting rules, and so it's an inefficient model that we were in before for a variety of reasons that made sense at that point in time. And so you don't have transparency and traceability into answering questions, and you've got a lot more cumbersome process in legacy ERPs. In addition, if you're a multi-GAAP organization, we're doing US GAAP, let's say, and US stat, the way we've seen most organizations construct it is that they do one basis of accounting first, and then they do the second basis of accounting. And so you've got a extended financial reporting process. You don't have concurrent processes. You've got to, let's say, close the books on a GAAP basis first. Only when you're done with GAAP can you tackle stat and do stat adjustments. And so your reporting period and cycles, especially over year end, takes you all the way through to the end of February. And the reality is that if you start deploying the integrated architecture that we've got, we do concurrent GAAP processes, and so you're closing GAAP and stat at the same time. It's dynamic, it's not people doing it, it's automated, and you can see side-by-side financials and better gap to stat reconciliations together. And so a lot of the constraints around how we get the data, the aggregation of data, the frequency that it runs, a lot of cases it's monthly processes or at best maybe weekly processes versus daily. A lot of constraints I see in how legacy ERPs were set up that really puts us in a suboptimal place. And that suboptimal place is where, to answer a question, it needs a ton of extra effort outside of the GL to go answer those questions. And we're extracting data and manipulating stuff in Excel spreadsheets and having a whole bunch of fun, including net new reconciliations. That just isn't necessarily the best use of our finance team's time.
Thank you. Thank you. That was great. Okay, last question. We've only got a couple minutes left. How would you suggest kicking off a finance modernization program that prioritizes getting the data part right? Is there an area you would start with?
Great question. So there is, and surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, I wouldn't start with technology. We don't start technology first. We always look at it from a perspective of make sure that you define what your future state needs to look like. So we talk about it in context of capabilities. What is it that you need to be able to do, and what is it that you want to be able to do in the future? So obviously financial reporting is table stakes, but do you want to be able to have daily access and intelligence around financial performance? Do you want to be able to do dynamic forecasting where your planning is more iterative every quarter versus an annual planning cycle? And so really start off and define what would the future look like for you. And then when you're aligned on that, then you start thinking about, okay, what technology pieces do I bring to the table to enable me to actually deliver against it? And you start planning that out and going through all of the other traditional stuff that could take place from a finance perspective. I definitely would not start off by just, hey, I got to replace the ERP. Let me go find a cloud-based ERP. I'd start with, what do I want to be when I grow up?
That's great. That's great. Okay, we are at the top of the hour. It looks like that's all the time we have. I'd like to thank David Fourie from KPMG for sharing your insights with us today, and of course, Aptitude Software for sponsoring this webinar. To all of those attending live, check out the Handouts tab now, and you'll find the KPMG and Aptitude ebook, The Path to a Digital First Mindset in Insurance. And you can download that now, and it will also be sent to you by email. So thank you everyone for attending. Keep an eye out for that follow-up email with information to watch or share this presentation on demand. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.